Hello and welcome back to On the Trail with Isaac Peltz. Today I have Samira Mohieddin. Did I say that correctly? Great. With me to talk about Palestine, to talk about Israel, and to talk about her life. This is an amazing woman with a career that spanned 10 years in the CBC. She studied history and performing arts. And she graduated from Zorian Institute's Genocide and Human Rights program. She has a diverse background that has enabled her to be both incredible in interviews, talk about challenging subjects with an eloquence that is unparalleled. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about your life, because your life is an incredible journey. And I find it entranced me as I read about you. Samira was born in Iran. And in 1976, it was 1976, I think, the Iranian Revolution
79.
I apologize. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution starts. And her family, the Mohyeddins, decided to flee the country because of this revolution. And it's incredible, on the very day where the monarchy fell in Iran, they got approved to move to Canada and land as immigrants. And so I wanted to start there. I wanted to know if you have memories from that time, what it was like as a child moving to Canada. I believe you were around 5 years old at the time?
Yes, actually I was 4. And we arrived in Canada on May 4th, 1979. And we actually arrived in a very small town named Wickham, in Drummondville. So it had a population of about 500. My paternal aunt, had a industrial farm there. They had about 200 cows. And so my introduction to Canada was very Canadian. We were baling hay and tapping maple syrup trees and putting it on snow and eating it. And I loved it. But my parents, who had come from a city of 8 million to a town of 500, after a little less than a year, we're like, we're out of here. We can't stay here. So we moved to Toronto.
You decided, you discovered a passion for performing arts as you grew up. And that's something I find really cool. My whole family is artist families. I was a musician long before I was a journalist. And what got you into the theater? What got you into the performing arts?
It was in high school, and I started reading plays by William Shakespeare, Michel Tremblay. We did a production of La Belle Sœur, and I had a really amazing drama teacher. His name was Philip Stanbury, and he saw something in me and said to me, this is in the last year of high school, he said, you should really apply for this conservatory, the American Musical and Dramatic Academy, and they were coming to do scholarship.
In New York, right?
Yeah, in Manhattan. They were coming to do scholarship auditions in Toronto. And I said, why not? And I told my mom, I said, I want to do this, and she said, we don't have money to send you to this school. And I said, don't worry about it. And I went to the audition, and I auditioned in front of the artistic director, actually. And I did the soliloquy from Act 2, Scene 2 of Hamlet, where he does the, oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. Is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction? And he goes on to talk about, why is it that this actor can act on his passion, whereas Hamlet, who's so full of reason to act, can't quite get there. And I always found this soliloquy, I don't know, for some reason it really touched me. But anyways, long story short, I got into the school, I went to the conservatory, and then I moved back to Toronto, did a couple plays, and then decided to go to university. My parents were begging me to get a real degree. So I went to U of T. Right. My undergrad was in religion, and then I did a master's in gender and modern Middle Eastern history. And then after that, I went to Zorian for genocide and human rights studies.
Right. Do you feel that these kind of combinations of things are what led to kind of the success that you're seeing? Because, your work on CBC was in a similar vein, was it not?
Yeah, it was sort of, my work at CBC was also all over the place, right? So my daily job, where I was for 8 years, was a producer at their national flagship show, The Current, at CBC Radio. But then,
I grew up watching you.
While I was there, I was able to host. So I pitched some shows. We did Unforked, and I was also co-hosting As It Happens from time to time. So I had an opportunity to sort of be all over CBC, which was really nice.
Now you won awards while you were there, did you not?
Yeah, I won two awards. One was gold at the New York Festivals Awards for a documentary I did on being in the hospital with my father for 28 days as he was in palliative care, dying from pancreatic cancer. And the other one, I won three awards. The second one was Amnesty International Media Award for a production on this Afghan woman whose husband blew half her face off. And we did an interview with her on The Current. And then the third was about the suicide crisis that was happening in Nunavik up in northern Quebec.
That's incredible. Now, something I've always wanted to ask you about is your identity as a queer woman in both the journalist and the Iranian world. I'm wondering about how that's been for you, if that's been challenging, if that's added any difficulties to finding your career, or if it's just always been pretty smooth sailing.
Yeah, no, I've been very lucky. I can't say that I have ever been prejudiced against or ever dealt with anything like that, neither in my own community or as a journalist. In fact, it sort of opened up a lot of doors for me. It allowed me to tap into the various identities I do have. Communities would trust me to tell their stories. And so it really wasn't ever an issue for me. It was just almost like an added bonus of.
Because you could speak to a certain group.
Yeah, yeah.
If you don't mind, I'd love to dive right into the topic that is obviously pressing on our minds and is what you are very well known for right now. You started your media, and after that, you very quickly, everything started. Oh no, I think you quit CBC a month after the attacks in October 7th, right?
I resigned from CBC, I think it was like November.
It's November 2023, right?
November 2023.
Yeah. And so like exactly 1 month after the violence broke out in Israel, after the October 7th attacks. Okay, did you resign because of the October 7th attacks? Was it any tension with CBC around reporting?
It's around yes and no. So I had already decided in 2022 that I need to go elsewhere. And the main reason for that is that when you are a full-time employee at the CBC, we call it golden handcuffs. You can't go and do other creative things elsewhere. And so during the Woman Life Freedom movement that was happening in Iran, I was getting a lot of requests from the BBC, Globe and Mail, other places to write op-eds or come on their programs and give analysis. And the reason I would ask like managing editors, can I go do this? And they would say, no. And so finally I got tired of the no's. And in my mind, I was like, I need to find somewhere else to go because I want to do other things. And I was working on a documentary about the Woman Life Freedom movement, about the women's movement in Iran. And it had gotten to a point where I could no longer just do it on the weekends. There were executive producers involved, and I had to sort of give my full time to it. Now, having said that, after October 7th, I was pulled in a lot into my managing editor's office for my social media because I was calling IDF spokespersons liars, or I was, because they were lying. But I realized that my knowledge of the region, of the history, had become a liability for my employer and not.
Interesting.
And I didn't want to pretend that there isn't an apartheid regime there. I didn't want to pretend that there isn't an occupation. I'm almost 50. And I was going to be damned if, the education that I had paid tens of thousands of dollars for is going to rot because I'm supposed to worship at the altar of objectivity. That's not going to happen. That's not the type of journalism I want to do, especially not during a genocide. So I decided, this is the time to go.
So something that constantly is a thing in centrist or left-leaning politics is, we condemn Israel, but we should also acknowledge the October 7th attacks. When you saw that attack on October 7th, how did you read it right away? What was your instant reaction?
I was horrified, I'm not going to lie. However, if you sit with it a little bit longer, you realize, okay, what were the underpinnings of that? What were the roots of it? And then everything started coming out. The Hannibal Directive. When you saw the video of hundreds and hundreds of cars burnt to a crisp, you realize that only Israeli Apache helicopter has the ability to singe hundreds of cars. Those aren't Hamas Kalashnikov rifles doing that. Then you heard from the actual people inside those kibbutzes who said, these were Israeli soldiers that bombed the houses. These were tanks, Israeli tanks that bombed the houses. And then the lies came, the 40 beheaded babies, the mass rapes. I mean, it was all orchestrated. And then at the same time, you heard the biblical language, right? Go and root out the seed of Amalek, which Netanyahu said. So it was all of these things coming together, and you quickly realize they are going to sacrifice the hundreds of hostages that are there in order to be able to do what they want to do for so long, which is take over this entire land and Judaize it, right? Bring in the settlers, everything they had done up until, that they had been wanting to do from 1948 on. I mean, this is not the thing I tell people always about what's going on in Gaza is that a lot of people use the word unprecedented. But really, the only thing that's unprecedented is the level of technology used to kill tens of thousands of Palestinians. Because when it comes to the displacement, the destruction, the occupation, that was always there. That has not changed. I mean, if you go and look at sites like, I live on British Path, and I urge people to go and just do a search of Gaza, and you'll see the exact same things. People in tents, people being beaten, starved. This whole starvation thing, Israel has been counting the calories of people who live in Gaza for decades. This is all a matter of public record. It's not some conspiracy that you need to dig out of, Israel's archives. It's in The Guardian. It's in AP. It's in Reuters. And it's all there. And that's another thing that I was speaking to a friend last night, and I was just like, and I hope this doesn't sound bad, but I just can't believe the level of stupidity of people right now. It really boggles my mind that Israel wants the world to believe that in 36 hospitals, there were Hamas command and control centers, and that one rendering from some, Adobe architectural application was enough to make the world go, okay, yeah, sure, go ahead and bomb 36. It's mind-boggling.
When, in your view, did it go from being a response to a full-on genocide?
I think it was right away. The intent was there from the beginning.
The whole time?
I think it was there right away. When you have a president, when you have Herzog say it's an entire nation out there that's responsible, right? That happened a week after. The moment that they said on October 9th, no water, no food, no electricity, cut. That was it. I mean, that you're basically saying the entire civilian infrastructure, you're dead. There will be no life here. What else is there to say other than that? It's unfortunate that we have such a churlish understanding of what genocide is. People think they need to see people wearing striped outfits and stars, and only then is it a Holocaust. No, that's not how it works. It's very basic. There has to be the intent to want to do away with it, with an entire people. It doesn't matter what the population numbers are, right? It has to do with intent. And Israel has shown from the hundreds of pronunciations of its leaders, from its presidents all the way down to the members of the Knesset, to its complicit media, that it wants to do away with the Palestinian people as a whole. And what does it mean when you target children systemically? That means you want to get rid of the seed, the roots, the future. When you systematically target children, this goes back to sort of the comment about getting rid of the seed, right? That was the directive that Netanyahu, commander-in-chief, gave to the Israeli soldiers when they went in. And, one of the things that is not looked at enough, I think, by the media is the biblical language and iconography that's used by both the soldiers and the Israel's leaders right now.
Is it used to summon sort of a nationalistic fervor?
Well, every genocide has different elements to it, right? Rwanda was really focused on creating, looking at Tutsis as cockroaches, right? And they really used the radio to sort of promulgate their ideology. and the idea that you had to cut down the Tutsis. They called them trees. You have to cut the trees down. Otherwise, they're going to come after us. And, this idea of victimhood is something that is very prevalent in people, right? You hear that a lot too with Israel playing the victim. So this weird thing where it's victim occupier, which makes no sense, right? It's the only time you'd see an occupier portrayed as a victim. But this is the language that we're seeing. And I'm not sure why there isn't a focus on it. I think there's maybe some hesitation that we don't want to, it might be delving into criticizing Judaism itself. But,
Right.
you can still look at how religion is being used in order to push this genocide forward. And it does create a fervor, right? I mean, religion does create fervor in those that, want it to. I mean, there are settlers already champing at the bit. They're waiting at the border to get in. They've been camped there for months. Right?
How do we deal with this? There's a big challenge every time you open your mouth and say, well, that's a genocide. People instantly across the internet, politicians, they go, anti-Semitism. How do we respond to that?
I tend to just not play the game. I never say I'm not an anti-Semite or, get defensive. I just look at them and say, okay, I really do. Because this isn't new. This was something that Israel started in the mid 80s and late 80s. They began this conflation. It was a campaign. They began to say that if you are critical of Israel, that means you're anti-Semitic. And they put it in the IRA definition, and I mean, we can get into that, but this is the Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. They are trying to push this definition of anti-Semitism that includes being critical of Israel, which unfortunately the province of Ontario has already adopted. And I think the school boards here are sort of grappling with whether or not to adopt it. Zionist organizations have really been pushing this. So if you are critical of Israel, you are somehow also anti-Semitic. And it's very dangerous because it's really hollowed out the term and it's allowed for real anti-Semites to find a home for themselves, which is really fucked up, right? And Israel only has itself to blame for that.
Right. You've seen that at the beginning of October 7th, there was a media bias that very much leaned into Israel is defending itself. But I've personally observed that the media landscape and the discussion around this has transformed quite a bit. And it seems to be because Palestinian activists, those who are protesting on behalf of Palestine, they seem to have won the narrative. Israel seems to have lost the narrative globally. And so how have you seen that change? And do you think it will make a difference long term in Israel and in this genocide?
It's interesting because I often have this argument with colleagues of mine who are journalists, because there's two camps, people who say things are getting better, but I think they're actually getting worse.
Interesting. I'd like to hear about that.
Because if you watch media segments from the 70s and 80s, you will hear reporters call Israel an occupying state. You will hear reporters actually refer to Israel as a settler state. They will use that term. Go and look at the New York Times in the 40s, 50s. Watch other news outlets, even NBC. NBC News from the early 80s and the late 70s would refer to Israel as an occupying state. This is NBC. This isn't like Democracy Now! Or whatever. This is NBC. You would never have that today. Today you have obfuscation. You have all of these sort of things where people are like, well, we don't want to be biased. And we don't want to refer to Israel as an apartheid state. But everyone knows that's exactly what Israel is. It would be okay if we covered this in the same way that we would a football match. So-and-so scored and then so-and-so did this. But you can't really cover what Israel is doing in a monkey stenography way of like, well, Israel says, and the Palestinians say, and then you stand in the middle like some jerk off, throw your hands up in the air and like, okay, up, over to you, audience, you decide. I mean, that's not helpful. That doesn't help people to know context, to know history, to know how we got here. And, when you say things like Palestinians die, but Israelis get killed. People see these things now. I think social media has had a huge impact on Israel losing this narrative. Not traditional media, independent media, social media has really been the engine that has been pushing this. And of course, that's why you see people like the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, Greenblatt trying to do away with TikTok, right? Remember early on, in Congress, they were debating whether or not to get rid of TikTok. This is the only reason. It's because they're losing the youth. A huge portion of Jewish youth are now anti-Zionist. And this has become a huge problem for Israel's controlling of this narrative. I always say this to people who don't like history. Israel does not like history. People, governments who constantly have to reinvent themselves, revise history, are people who have something to hide. And that's what Israel is. Israel is constantly having to revise itself, get a new plan. The new narrative is that Israel is actually decolonizing itself. I'm not sure if you've heard this, but it's quite hilarious. This is sort of in their influencer world. Israel has allotted $150 million. This came out about 5-6 months ago. The government said itself that it has allotted $150 million for Hasbara, which is, sort of ads and all these sponsor ads that Israel has been taking out on YouTube and all of these other places, Facebook. They push a lot of ads out, whether it's to bring down UNRWA. You can see them, and I've talked about this before and actually recorded them. They did a very effective campaign against the United Nations for the past 8 months, right? Starting in January of 2024. So they really rely on these ads and Facebook, on YouTube, to try and control the narrative. But really, the jig is up, and Israel knows it. And this, I don't credit the media changing or whatever. I don't. I really feel that the heads of these media companies know that a reckoning is coming, that they are complicit, and they know that when the history of this genocide gets told, there will be a section allotted just for them, because it's been quite atrocious the way they have covered this.
Right. Yeah, it has. It's been something quite exceptional how badly they've covered it. And it's improved, I guess, but as you said, there is a complicity there that is going to be written about.
Sorry to interrupt you. Where is the improvement?
Well, they have been more specific about the numbers, is specifically what I'm thinking about. They have been publishing more numbers about Palestinians killed, although you're right in saying like they haven't been calling it a genocide. They haven't been calling a spade. So
no,
I might just be off in my analysis, frankly.
Up until 2 weeks ago, our national public broadcaster, the CBC, the host said, "I'm sorry, I'm going to have to correct you. It's not a genocide."
We lost my brother the first week of the genocide.
I just want to acknowledge, and you're certainly not alone in this, Isra, that you use the word genocide, and many people have in this conversation about what has taken place over the course of this war. You, of course, know that we cannot use that word.
Well, this type of journalism is where the spokesperson becomes, journalists have become the spokesperson of the spokesperson, right? And you see it on BBC and you see it on CBC. That's not our job.
Right.
It's to sit there and say, well, Israel would say this. What?
Right. No, our job is to ask questions and let the person speak freely. Well, thank you for responding to that one. That's really interesting and a point I had not thought about enough. Something I wanted to talk about is the current shift in policy stances from the Carney government. Would you say it's a policy shift? Because that's how the media's posed it. And it's sort of true, but then he's like, with conditions. So is it a policy shift?
It's a great question, but I would have to say no. It's not a policy shift at all. Canada wants to, have its reputation and eat its genocide cake too. It doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, we have shown as a country that we are okay with sacrificing our reputation on the world stage in order to allow Israel to run roughshod over international law. Don't forget that Carney, speaking to Christian Amanpour on CNN 3 weeks ago, said he wants to see a Zionist Palestine. Those were his examples.
That was one of the craziest things I've ever seen.
First, the core question: can there be a lasting peace in the Middle East without peace in Gaza that takes into account Gaza and West Bank effectively working on a path to a Palestinian state? You use several adjectives. I would agree with all of those, and living side by side in security with Israel, a Zionist, if you will, Palestinian state.
That was one of the craziest statements I've ever seen in an interview.
It just goes to show you the man knows nothing about this issue. And the people who are advising him are also just as ignorant. And for him to come out in the middle of a genocide and say that he wants to see elections held by 2026 shows you just how delusional this government is. And it is so cruel when you think about it at the heart of it. Canada sending, big pails out of the sky that we know have killed several people already, and airdropping aid, which is enough for maybe 5 families to deal with when you have millions of people who are being systemically starved, is a theater of the absurd. I mean, the only policy shift is that we never go this alone, right? Whatever the UK does, our Commonwealth leader, we follow suit. So the UK said, we will recognize. And Canada went along and said, we will also. And the hilarious thing about this, Isaac, is the blowback. That's one of the things that I focused on in my last report, was the blowback to this very mealy-mouthed statement of recognition. What was the blowback? The blowback was Canada rewards terror. Really? Is that what Canada's doing, rewarding terror? How about the fact that Zionist terrorists in the lead up to Israel becoming a state committed hundreds of terrorist acts, killing diplomats, killing British soldiers, hanging them, mining their bodies when people would come to take their bodies down from the trees, blowing up hotels, railways, ports? I mean, if you talk about rewarding a terrorist state, I think we should be talking about Israel. This type of rhetoric is so ridiculous. It's ahistorical. And what it does is it puts Canada in a sort of, we're going to wash our hands of our complicity. You're talking about recognizing a state as you send weapons to the state that's committing a genocide against those people. Come on.
Can I ask one last question before you go? Do you have time for one more?
Sure.
So what we're seeing now is Netanyahu saying that they're going to displace the rest of the people who are in Gaza and the West Bank. And it strikes me as an action being taken because of these countries saying they're going to recognize a Palestinian state. How would you analyze that? And do you think this is kind of a last move to basically rush through the end of the genocide and be done with it? Or what do you think is going to happen with this?
I think that this move has more to do with Netanyahu wanting to stay in power, because this is something the settlers want. This is something his ministers want, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and they have threatened to leave government and have done so before, which means Netanyahu's whole coalition just collapses. And I think it also prolongs the war and the genocide. Remember, Netanyahu is supposed to be in court. He's really might even go to jail for corruption charges. But every time he bombs Iran, bombs Syria, all of this just gets delayed. So I think there's 2 things going on here. I don't think it has anything to do with the threats of recognizing a Palestinian state. I think it really has to do with wanting to do away with the Palestinian problem and to occupy Gaza. Gaza has one of the biggest natural gas reserves in the world. This is, again, nothing I'm coming up with. This was a UN report that came out prior to October 7th. And one of the things we haven't touched on yet is a public inquiry that needs to happen as to why is it that it took Israeli soldiers 6 hours to get to those kibbutzes. That is usually an hour drive, but it took helicopters 6 hours to mobilize to go and save these people? No, there's something definitely going on here. And Netanyahu wants to avoid that. He wants to avoid a public inquiry. He wants to avoid going to court himself, and he wants to stay in power. And a genocide and a continued genocide and war would enable that. I'm very sorry to say this, but I don't think that Israel will in any way ever be held accountable for this genocide. I think they will get away with it, just as they got away with what they did in 1948, just as they got away with what they did in 1967. The world has shown that it is impotent and that it is okay with dead Palestinians. And that's the world we've created. We have only ourselves to blame for it. I have no hope.
Thank you so much, Samira. Yeah, I look forward to talking again. Please check out Samira's Patreon. It is www.patreon.com/onthelines media. That is On the Line Media. I will put a big text right here. Go check it out right now. Go sign up for her Substack. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate you. Have a lovely day.